Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best wildcard team for Game Week 5, and we still have some Champions League games taking place tonight, and we will see what happens in the press conferences tomorrow. You can see the clean sheet odds on screen taken by the website fantasyfootballpundit.com. Liverpool are top in the Merseyside derby after their 3-2 victory against Atletico Madrid. They left it late once again, and they've made a habit of winning games in the very last minutes of those matches, and they have a 42% probability, and that is quite a low figure for the top spot of any Premier League team this weekend. Aston Villa are second despite a very poor start to the season, facing Sunderland away from home. Arsenal are third, and they're facing Manchester City at home. Fulham, Nottingham Forest and Wolves complete the top 6, and in last place is Everton, facing Liverpool away with a 13% chance of keeping a clean sheet. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. You can see my top 10 captaincy options in my team selection video, which I published yesterday, and there could be a predicted lineups tomorrow, as well as that deadline stream on Saturday. Be sure not to miss it by smashing the like button, subscribing to my channel, and also hitting that notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, both FPL and UCL fantasy. And once we approach match day 2 in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be making a best wildcard and limitless squad into separate videos, and also doing my team selection where I could be activating a chip in the Champions League, and then the deadline stream on that Tuesday. There'll be plenty of content for both fantasy formats throughout the season. Check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, further access to my videos, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. My squad value is 100.6 million, but spending power is different. If you check out websites like FPL.team, it will tell you how much money you have available to spend on your 15-man squad, and mine is roughly around 100.1 million, but it does vary depending on when you bought certain players and if they've gone up in price enough by 0.2 million whilst they're in your squad to increase by 0.1 million in terms of their selling price. That's all covered in my previous wildcard podcasts, but I'll start off with the 2 goalkeepers. There's a significant change between the sticks, but towards the end of this podcast, I'll highlight different drafts and I'll show you some different goalkeeper options you can pick for the long term. The same goes for other key positions in your FPL team. Arsenal's recent record against Man City is very strong, but ultimately it was a 5-1 victory for the Gunners last time out. I wouldn't expect the same scoreline. I think it'll be much cagier, and Man City will definitely bring their A game, and they've also made a great goalkeeper acquisition themselves in Gianluigi Donnarumma. But I think David Raya long term is going to be the best goalkeeper in FPL. There is a difference in price between him and Vicario, who has better fixtures at this moment in time, but Arsenal's fixture swing begins in Game Week 7, and that's where going a bit early with an Arsenal defender or David Raya in goal could pay dividends, and they are ranked highly in the clean sheet odds, which I showed you towards the beginning of this podcast. And it's also cheaper to have David Raya and then these 4.5 to 4.8 million options in your defensive line, as opposed to covering that same defense with their goalkeeper. Let's say, for example, with Tottenham Hotspur, you go for Vicario, who costs 5.1 million, and then try to cover Arsenal defensively with Calafiori or Timber. And if you go even more expensive, the likes of Gabriel costs 6.1 million at this moment in time. That's still an option for you, and you may want to consider it. Other drafts I'll show you have these sorts of combinations in mind, but the backup is Dubravka between the sticks, and we could see Darlow get a run in that Leeds United team, so you might want to go for Darlow instead of Dubravka. That is a possibility, and it all depends on how long Perry is out for. He's not going to feature this weekend, but we don't know the extent of that injury and whether Perry needs surgery. So instead of Dubravka, we could have finally another 4 million goalkeeper with excellent fixtures. Leeds United are right up there near the top of the fixture difficulty rating from Game Week 5 onwards. So if you want to go a little bit different with both your goalkeepers, going for David Raya and Darlow could be the way to go. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Would you go for the Leeds United goalkeeper, or instead just have Dubravka as your main backup? In the long term, that is the safest course of action, and Meslier could still be a risk to Darlow, but after that performance against Fulham, I think he will keep his spot in the side for at least one more game week. So short term, this could definitely work out very well. But with goalkeepers, you want to prevent transfers in this position and try to focus your efforts on the outfield positions. You can't go wrong with Crystal Palace defenders like Lacroix, Richards, Gay, Mitchell, and Daniel Munoz, who is the most exciting of the lot. but Lacroix will offer that consistency when it comes to DEFCON, and even when he doesn't score it, he's always on the cusp of getting enough defensive actions, which is 10 needed for a defender to score those additional points, and ultimately you want the DEFCON points and not a nearly man, but Lacroix will be very consistent when it comes to that sort of system in FPL, which was implemented this season, and he will get a few clean sheets for Crystal Palace. We saw one over the weekend against Sunderland in that goalless draw. And against West Ham, who have been very suspect from set pieces, I think Lacroix could be one of the main targets who could even score a goal in this fixture. And he vastly underperformed his XG last season, which was over 3. That's a very healthy number for a centre-back, and he had plenty of big chances from those scenarios. I think Lacroix will score a couple of goals this season from headers, and I think West Ham in Gameweek 5 is a possibility. You combine that with a clean sheet and also DEFCON potentially, and Lacroix could be one of the highest scoring defenders in Gameweek 5, and even in the long term, facing Liverpool at home in Gameweek 6, he can score defensive contribution points and be a solid asset in the long term. The same goes for the next option, who is covering the Premier League champions, and they have kept plenty of clean sheets in recent matches, at least in the Premier League. Virgil van Dijk is my favourite Liverpool defender, but Frimpong started in the Champions League against Atletico Madrid, and he also won the penalty and got the assist for it, which Salah converted in the 95th minute to give Liverpool all 3 points. But Van Dijk will get the defensive contributions on a more regular basis compared to any other Liverpool defender. And Milos Kerkez was actually hooked very early on against Burnley and didn't start against Atletico. So I think Virgil van Dijk is the safest bet in this Liverpool defence. He can also score a few goals from set pieces and score DEFCON, very similar to Lacroix. He cost 6.1 million, but he's definitely worth it at this moment in time. And you can also go for Gabriel at the same price tag. Cucurella at 6.2 million was surprisingly benched against Brentford, but that certainly won't be the case against Manchester United this weekend. So I think this defensive line already looks really strong, and there are plenty of changes from previous wildcard podcasts which I've discussed, and you can still go for something similar to those previous editions and still have a very solid team and platform overall. The next defender is actually going to be from Tottenham Hotspur, and you can go for Pedro Porro if you have enough funds. He will still have the highest ceiling, but Van de Ven has had a great start to the season. He even scored from a set piece against West Ham, and Tottenham Hotspur look really strong from those scenarios now under Thomas Frank. There's a massive improvement from set pieces compared to last season under Ange Postecoglou, and Mickey Van de Ven cost 4.7 million at this moment in time. If you had him from before, this will be even cheaper for you, and you'll have money in the bank to spare. And that's why if you have a few of these players already, it does help you afford this 50-man squad, and then you can make other upgrades if necessary. Tottenham Hotspur's fixtures are still quite decent, and they are 4th in the FDR up until Gameweek 9, but there is a clear fixture swing happening in Gameweek 10. You need to be very wary about that, and I think in the long term, Tottenham will keep fewer clean sheets anyway, but for now, Van de Ven is a decent FPL pickup, and maybe I was wrong about talking about skipping him a couple of weeks ago because they have been very impressive defensively. They kept another clean sheet against Villarreal in the Champions League in matchday 1. We've now got 2 defenders left to complete this defensive line, and one of them is just going to be there as a 4 million option to sit on your bench, and that is Reinildo Mandava. It could be Goodmanson still, who got a very unfortunate own goal against Fulham in the dying embers of that game, but he got back-to-back 9-pointers at Ellen Road, and I think Goodmanson could be decent in home fixtures, and Leeds United, of course, are near the top of the FDR. Only Wolves are above them up until Gameweek 9, but I think Reinildo Mandava still has good fixtures on paper. You can also go for Mukiele from the same team. He can get more defensive contributions than Reinildo Mandava. That's something else you might want to think about, and ultimately Sunderland are looking quite decent defensively at this moment in time, and it's mainly thanks to their goalkeeper Roofs, who has been the best goalkeeper so far this season in the Premier League, and in FPL terms is right up there at only 4.5 million. So instead of Reinildo, you could go for a bigger differential in Mukiele from the same defence, and he would ultimately sit on your bench more often than not, but that's just another scenario, another alternative for you, and going for someone who's got even lower ownership than Reinildo Mandava. The last defender is going to be from Bournemouth, and he has gone up to 4.6 million over the last couple of weeks. He's scoring defensive contribution points in every single match so far this season, and Senesi has featured in previous wildcard squads. I think he's well worth the money, and you could even start him in difficult games on paper, like Newcastle at home coming up next, and I think he kind of guarantees you 2 or 3 points minimum, even when Bournemouth concede multiple goals. And if you mix that with a clean sheet or attack and return, he's also got a great chance of getting bonus points, and I do prefer him over Diakite, who is currently injured, Truffert and Petrovic in goal as a 4.5 million goalkeeper who could be quite decent in the long term, but I'd rather cover Bournemouth defensively with Marcus Senesi. So this defensive line has a lot of variation and different avenues to points. You might argue that the attacking threat is maybe lacking a little bit. You don't have an exciting wing-back like Ait Nouri, who is currently injured, Frimpong or Daniel Munoz, and you can still find a way to fit one of these players in there. Pedro Porro is another. He hasn't really shown it so far this season, but you do have set-piece threat with the likes of Van Dijk, Van de Ven, and Lacroix, and also DEFCON potential from the vast majority of these defenders, and nice fixtures in the long term, and plenty of clean sheet potential. But it's now time to go to the midfield, and this is where things get even more exciting with the goals and the assists on offer. Under David Moyes, Everton have been a much better offensive team, and they might be conceding more goals in the process, but Tarkowski remains a brilliant option in terms of defensive contributions, and I would recommend him as a long-term option. But Ndiaye will be my favourite midfielder, even over Jack Grealish, who costs 6.8 million. But if you have enough funds and you really want to go for Jack Grealish, who is in brilliant form, I don't mind that so much, but I think Ndiaye will score more goals in general, and even scored defensive contribution points over the weekend in that goalless draw against Aston Villa. Dewsbury Hall is decent at 5 million, but Ndiaye at 6.5 offers great value, and he's going to be the highest scoring Everton midfielder in the long term. That's the way I feel. You just need him to keep fit. He was a doubt going into Gameweek 4, but he started the game and he's crucial for that Everton attack, and he can play multiple positions on the left, on the right, and even as a striker when needed. The next choice is the best midfielder in FPL right now in Antoine Semenyo, who has gone up in price by 0.5 million, the most of any player so far this season, and it's well justified. Bournemouth have the fixtures. Semenyo caught everyone's attention from Gameweek 1 in that Premier League opener against Liverpool, scoring a brace, so he's fixture-proof. He's a talismanic figure. He's by far the best Cherries attacker overall, even over Evanilson, who would be second in the long term, and Semenyo is currently on penalties. That could change with the return of Justin Kluivert to the starting 11 or whenever the Dutchman is on the pitch. But Antoine Semenyo has that in his locker now, and he's also got so much open play threat with 6 big chances so far this season, and in the previous campaign he had over 100 shots and was right up there with Erling Haaland and Salah in terms of the leading shot volume of any Premier League player. So Semenyo is a great acquisition. I'd highly recommend it. I also talk about this in my previous Transfers podcast, including this week, and my team selection. He is one of the top targets for my FPL team, and I think he's well worth it for anybody watching. He will seriously improve your midfield if you are struggling this week with Rangers away to Arsenal and Ndiaye facing Liverpool away. Speaking of which, I would go for a Liverpool midfielder, and ideally it would be Salah, but I have made a sacrifice to buy the biggest big hitter at the moment up front. But Cody Gakpo would be a very solid option. He was subbed off before 60 minutes against Atletico Madrid, but I think he'll start in Gameweek 5 against Everton, and his home record is brilliant for Liverpool, and that's where he'll get the bulk of his big returns and the vast majority of his goals. And against Everton in the early kickoff, I think he'll start and potentially score for Liverpool in another victory for them as they chase another Premier League title. But there are still 2 spots left in this midfield, and one of them might be controversial, but Bruno Fernandes remains a solid long-term option with many avenues to points. He's on penalties. He'll get a lot of bonus points whenever he scores or assists, and I think Man United should click eventually, but we keep saying this, of course, and under Ruben Amorim, that's 31 Premier League points from 31 games, and he has 3 more matches to save his job according to multiple sources and reports, and I think Bruno Fernandes will be key in getting Man United those all-important victories and scoring goals by creating chances and scoring goals himself, to be honest. Bryan Mbeumo might offer better value at 8.1 million. That's something you could consider, and I wouldn't blame you if you want to avoid Man United completely, but Bruno Fernandes was a big regret of mine not buying him to replace Cole Palmer a couple of weeks ago, and by captaining him, of course, that would have resulted in a 20-point swing by also starting Ndiaye, which I covered in my previous FPL podcast. But Bruno Fernandes is still fixture proof, and he will score plenty of points even from a deeper position, and it all depends on the personnel available, because sometimes he can play more advanced, which is what you want to see with Bruno Fernandes. And if you're not completely convinced about him, you might want to go to Bryan Mbeumo or just cover a different midfield entirely. But I'll be quite honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of the midfielders available at this moment in time, apart from Saka when he's available, Mohamed Salah, Cole Palmer, who you might want to stretch to, at 1.4 million more, it's going to be difficult to find many standouts in the midfield. I think Semenyo is one of them, and Moises Caicedo could be another. The only problem with going for Caicedo is it could block you from triple Chelsea if you want Sanchez in goal or Cucurella in that defensive line alongside Palmer and Joao Pedro. You would need to make a sacrifice there to get Moises Caicedo, and if you got him, Palmer and Joao Pedro, that's 3 out of the 8 forward slots and midfield slots, so to speak, covered by Chelsea, which isn't ideal, but Caicedo almost guarantees you 4 or 5 points per match, and if you can mix that with a goal and also bonus points, you're going to get some massive returns, as we saw over the weekend in that 2-2 draw against Brentford, where he scored 12 points. He was terrible in the Champions League, and he was at fault for both goals, or 2 of the 3 goals conceded against Bayern Munich, but Caicedo is still one of the best defensive midfielders in the Premier League, and he's scoring defensive contribution points in virtually every single game, so he's well worth it at 5.6 million. Let's now go to the forward line, and some of the sort of sacrifices we made in this position have actually resulted in some massive upgrades up front, and one of them is the Norwegian robot who can't stop scoring for club and country. There's no doubt I'm extremely bullish on Erling Haaland, but I just have to say for Gameweek 5 specifically, I wouldn't be wildcarding just to buy Erling Haaland in when he's facing Arsenal away, and for those that are looking to take multiple hits and sell Salah in the process, I think that is a massive mistake because Salah is ranked significantly higher in my captaincy list compared to Erling Haaland for Gameweek 5. This will change, of course, when Man City host Burnley in Gameweek 6, and from that point onwards, there'll be a huge push from Salah to Erling Haaland. I might even do that for a -4 hit, as covered in my team selection video. But for Gameweek 5 specifically, as good as Erling Haaland is, and he can certainly score against Arsenal, the chances are much lower compared to Salah, who was incredible in the Champions League, scoring a goal and getting an assist against Atletico Madrid. He would be the clear standout for the captaincy against Everton at home in the early kickoff. The only one who can stop him is probably Gandhi at this moment in time. The second option in this forward line is going to be a bit controversial. He's a very short-term punt, and you might want to sell him by Gameweek 7, but Chris Wood has the highest ceiling of any forward in Gameweek 5 in my opinion, facing Burnley away. The last time he faced his former club and the Clarets, he scored a brace actually, but Forest's record is quite poor against Burnley, and they lost 3-2 in the Carabao Cup against Swansea City despite being 2-0 up, and 2 goals were scored by Igor Jesus, so that would be a huge concern of course for Chris Wood moving forwards, but I still think his first choice, and he was only subbed off before 60 minutes against Arsenal because of the long travel distances between New Zealand and the UK. I'm not saying he's going to play 90 minutes, I don't think that'll be the case with Kalimundo and Igor Jesus knocking on the door, but Chris Wood should still get 70 minutes, maybe a little bit less if things go a bit wrong there for Nottingham Forest over the weekend, but I think Chris Wood has a very high ceiling against Burnley away and Sunderland at home. If you want to go a bit longer term, Jean-Philippe Mateta, Nick Waldemar and Evanussen might be even better choices, but what puts me off Evanussen is having Senesi and Semenyo already in your setup, and tripling up on Bournemouth, as good as they are, doesn't seem viable at this moment in time. But the last option is going to be a very template pick. He went up in price to 7.8 million very recently. Joao Pedro is certainly worth it, and I don't mind doubling up on the Chelsea attack, so to speak, if you've got Cole Palmer and Joao Pedro, or in this case Caicedo, who for me is a bit of a different pick in general. He's there for the defensive contributions, and Joao Pedro seems to get goals and assists in most matches for Chelsea. The only 2 exceptions, I think, so far in his Chelsea career is in Gameweek 1 against Crystal Palace and also against Bayern Munich in that 3-1 loss. But overall, Joao Pedro will be very consistent for the Blues, and he's also a potential penalty taker when Cole Palmer and Enzo Fernandez aren't on the pitch, and from open play, he offers a very high ceiling with the goals, the assists, and bonus points overall. So this 15-man squad looks very strong, but what about the starting 11 and the captaincy? That's what I'll discuss in the next section using the website FPL.team, and plenty of alternative drafts and picks in every single position will be highlighted. After building this wildcard squad, I would have 0.3 million in the bank, and some of you might have even more, others might have even less. I'll discuss some alternatives as we go along just in case you need the extra budget. But David Raya in goal is still a solid option, and Arsenal are third in the clean sheet odds this week, which is quite surprising to be quite honest with you. You can definitely go for Darlow or maybe Dubravka instead of Raya this week, but generally speaking, always start your main goalkeeper because they'll be more reliable in the grand scheme of things, and Arsenal might have the best defence in Europe at this moment in time. This defensive line also comprises of Lacroix, Virgil van Dijk and Senesi, so all of them can get defensive contribution points, a potential clean sheet maybe, and they can also score goals from set pieces, especially in the case of Virgil van Dijk. And that midfield has Bruno Fernandes, Gakpo, Caicedo, and Antoine Semenyo, and the front line looks very strong this week with Chris Wood, Erling Haaland, and Joao Pedro. The bench has Darlow, Ndai, Van de Ven, and it could be Mukiele, Renildo Mandava. It all depends on what you prefer. I think Mukiele might have even higher defensive contribution potential, so you could go for him instead with lower ownership as well. And the expected points is quite low at 49.5, and I've got Chris Wood captain, but you could maybe switch to Antoine Semenyo, who has been more reliable so far this season. Joao Pedro is a decent outside shout with a great record against Manchester United, and Erling Haaland is always a consideration, but he would be a triple captaincy opportunity in Game Week 6, and from that point onwards, I'd probably put the armband on him in most game weeks. Cody Gakpo is quite underrated, facing Everton at home, and Bruno Fernandes is always a decent punt, but I don't think I'd go for him as a captaincy option at this moment in time. So let's discuss some alternatives, which still has David Raya in goal, but you've got Renildo Mandava and Dubravka on the bench. There is also Tarkowski, so you've got two Everton players here, and Tarkowski can still be very good in the difficult fixtures like Liverpool away. Van de Ven is in the starting 11 now, but Senesi and Lacroix remain in this 50-man squad, and this is a way of getting Cole Palmer into the team over Bruno Fernandes. Gakpo, Semenyo and Caicedo remain. The same goes for Haaland and Joao Pedro, but Nick Waldemada, as a cheaper forward, does make his way into this team, and this squad is more expensive with nothing left in the bank in terms of my budget. And you can also go for Evanilson over Waldemada, but I'm not entirely convinced about that triple up in the Bournemouth team. And the other alternative includes this. With Robert Sanchez in goal, you've got Dubravka as the backup, Lacroix, Virgil van Dijk and Gabriel, so this will be quite similar to previous wildcard squads I've showed you. Brian Mbeumo takes the place of Bruno Fernandes, and that really helps with the budget. Jean-Philippe Mateta costs the exact same now as Chris Wood at 7.6 million. Gakpo, Caicedo, Semenyo, Haaland, Joao Pedro, Ndai, Senesi, and a Sunderland defender or anyone at 4 million still looks fairly decent, and there is around 0.2 to 0.3 million in the bank. The expected points is quite low with all of these squads, but in the long term, you've got a very versatile set of teams here, and you can play different formations, a 4-4-2, a 3-4-3, a 3-5-2, and sometimes even a 4-3-3, but you do have plenty of options and squad depth, so that can cover for injuries, suspensions, and other factors. And it's worth noting that with this alternative squad you see on screen, instead of captaining Jean-Philippe Mateta, I'd probably lean towards Antoine Semenyo at this moment in time, and you can see my full captaincy list in that team selection podcast from yesterday. But that concludes the best wildcard team for Game Week 5. I think it's a bit awkward to use the wildcard at this point, especially if you're going from Salah to Erling Haaland. The best time to do so will be in Game Week 6, and a lot of people will be pulling the plug and making that sort of switch in the coming weeks. So that's going to be a monstrous shift, and we could see Erling Haaland become the most highly owned player in FPL, and Salah dropping quite significantly, which could be a mistake, by the way, because some people were talking about this at this stage last season. I know Salah had an even better start, but people were looking at selling him on Game Week 6 for the wild card and going to Luis Diaz, and then quickly they realised that mistake and went back to him. Ultimately, I realised that going from Salah to Diaz is a lot different compared to Salah to Haaland, because with the Norwegian robot, we know we're guaranteed goals. It's just about, does he justify that 14.2 million price tag now, and will he be your captaincy option in most game weeks? And the answer would be yes from Game Week 6 onwards. I might even triple captain him against Burnley at home. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Our aim is to get this to over 150 likes and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 36,000 subscribers. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, fair likes to my videos, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Saturday for the next deadline stream, and stay tuned for more UCL Fantasy and FPL content.